So for my Module 6 assessment, I'm going to start out by explaining the difference between content area text and literacy text. So for content area text, one of the main ways they differ from literacy text is through the vocabulary. So with content area text, they're going to use very specified, usually very complex vocabulary that is unfamiliar to the students. They've never seen this vocabulary before until it's presented in this content area and this discipline. So a lot of times those vocabulary words need to be explicitly taught so that students can understand what is trying to be taught through the lesson. If they don't understand the vocabulary being used, they're not going to understand the concept being taught. And a lot of times the content area vocabulary isn't associated with anything that they're familiar with, so they can't use a prior knowledge or anything like that to kind of make an educated guess on what these new vocabulary words might mean. They're very obscure in the fact that they're not going to match with anything else a student might know. So a lot of content area teachers must put a lot of time and effort into making sure students understand the vocabulary before expecting them to read a text to learn from it. Because of the difficulty and the complexity with content area text, a lot of the time students become very frustrated when reading them. They're very difficult to understand, and they're not getting much benefit from it because of how little they're able to understand from it because they don't know so many of the words, or they can't understand how the information is being structured or how these concepts are being related. In comparison to that, like you have literacy texts that utilize much more familiar and much more common vocabulary words, and the structure of those texts is much more, a lot of times they read like a novel, so it's much more engaging and exciting, and usually a good storyline to follow. So students enjoy reading those texts a lot more. So a really good way to combine the benefits from both like content area text and literacy text is to use authentic text when teaching a content area or in a specific discipline. So using a letter or a description from something specific to that discipline would make students much more engaged in reading it, and it would be much easier for them to understand the content that's trying to be taught rather than being forced to read a textbook that's not easy for them to understand. Alright, so my favorite part about this module was being able to learn about hyperlexia. So hyperlexia is something I had a very basic understanding of just from asking questions about my niece and nephew a few years prior to this. So I never really understood what this disorder was. I just know that my niece and nephew, who are both severely autistic, could read innately with this ridiculous amount of accuracy that just couldn't be explained. So after seeing how they could read and how amazing this ability seemed to be, I started asking questions and found the term hyperlexia, but never really understood this disorder in much depth. So completing this module really helped my understanding of how my niece and nephew read and some of their strengths as well as some of their weaknesses, and then how to educate them and how to help them so that they can read to the best of their ability and comprehend what they're reading to the best of their ability. So before I keep talking about what I've learned, I have a video of my niece, who is 7, and she is diagnosed as severely autistic, reading a anatomy card about the spinal cord. And so she's 7 in 2nd grade, and she can read every word on this, that she's never seen this card before. So it's really interesting to see how, even though she's never seen these words before, she's able to sound them out and make a very good guess as to what the word is. And she's able to read this entire card with relative fluency. However, she comprehends none of it. So it's very, very intriguing to watch how she can read something so effortlessly, but be unable to understand it.
And around the base of the skull, this point of 2/3 of the way down the back, running through the vertebral canal. This cord itself has a Central.
Central region.
Central region of gray matter, which is divided into posterior, dorsal, and anterior ventral horns, and intermediate zone is green.
So as you can see, she's able to read far above grade level, and it's really quite impressive. Unfortunately, she's able to understand very little. So we have to go back through and discuss the different elements of the story, and a lot of times it's verbally expressed. She has a much better retention of the information, but reading anything, very little of that information actually sticks with her. So to demonstrate more thoroughly Kaya's ability with comprehension, I had her pick a book to read to record for you, and she picked How Are You Peeling?, which is one of her obsessions right now. She's really, really interested in vegetables. She sings a song about all the names of vegetables, and then also with feelings, trying to understand feelings. So this is a book that she really likes, and so she can read the book very fluently. And she chose to hold the story up so that you could see the pictures. It made it a little difficult for her to read, but I let her read it how she chose to read it. And at the end, I asked her some comprehension questions, and it's really intriguing to see how much of the story she was able to understand, even though she's read this book multiple times, and she's very fluent with reading it. But it's interesting the parts of the story that stood out to her.
Jealous? If they're pointed to, when you are hurt, they comforts you. So many smiles? Can you decide who's feeling safe? Who's feeling pride? Wired? Tired? Need a kiss? What do you mean? Do you know anyone like this? Do you let your skin show? Who do you love? How do they know? Learn how to feel, but when you feel is understood, you have a friend that feels good.
All done?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we watch the video now?
Yeah, we'll watch it when we're all done. Can you tell me some of the feelings that were in this book?
Yeah.
What feelings were in the book?
Pepper, apples, oranges, grapefruits. No grapefruits.
There's a lemon in there.
Lemon, ginger.
So those were some of the characters.
Lemon, green apple, and peach.
So those were some of the characters in here. What were some of the feelings? What were some of the feelings that they had in there?
The vegetables and
How did the vegetables feel?
happy.
Yeah, some of them felt happy. Why did some of them feel happy?
What?
Why did some of the vegetables feel happy?
The fruits feel kind of bored or something.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe give a kiss.
Oh yeah, so sometimes when somebody gives you a kiss, it makes you feel happy.
Yeah.
Very good. Now, do you want to read one other book for me? Sorry, school bus. So, it's really interesting to see her responses to my questions, and a lot of times with Kaya, I have to be very careful on how I phrase my questions in order to get the information from her. So a lot of times if I get a response that doesn't make sense, or if I don't get a response at all, it's because the question wasn't phrased in a way that she can understand. So a lot of times I simply restate my question to see if I get a better response, a more accurate representation of what she understood or what she knows. But as you can see, she understood very little of that story, and a lot of it was just the concrete, the pictures, so seeing the vegetables, and she couldn't articulate very much anything abstract, so she couldn't explain why a vegetable might feel the way it does, or what led up to the feeling, or how the character would feel after something happened. She could only understand and remember something that was concrete, so she would remember the details on which vegetables were in the story, but not why the vegetables felt the way they did. I then wanted to give an example of her reading a text that she's never seen before in a more story format, and then demonstrate how she's able to understand something that's unfamiliar to her. You want to read a page?
I'm so scared about this.
You've never seen this book, have you? This is Magic School Bus and the Science Fair Expedition. Let's see if you can read a page. I think you'll like this book a lot. Okay, let's see where's. Alright, let's start here.
Can you read this?
How about I read one page and you read the next page? So I'm going to read this page, you read this page. In Miss Frizzle's class, we really needed help. We were working on projects for the science fair. The fair was only a few days away, but some of us had no idea what to do.
Well, then I don't have suggestions. Then where could they get ideas for the new science museum? The museum is just around the corner. We could walk there instead of riding our wacky old school bus.
Very good reading.
Bye bye bus. Boy, without that busy bus, Miss Friends would take us on a crazy trip.
What were the students doing today? What are the students in Miss Frizzle's class doing today?
Persuade children.
Hi. What are the students in Miss Frizzle's class doing today?
They're doing science.
What science are they doing?
The museum, science museum.
Are they going to the science museum?
Yeah.
Why are they going to the science museum? They're working on their projects for the science fair. And they're going to get some ideas from the science museum.
Yeah.
Pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very good. I liked how you kept looking for clues in the pictures to figure out what was going on in the story. That was a very good strategy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to finish reading this book?
Yeah.
Okay. So I find it very interesting the fact that her brain is able to read words so effortlessly. She sees the words and can decode them with relative ease, and she could read every word on that page, but for some reason the words don't have any meaning to her. So it's so interesting to see that her brain has such a disconnect between those two things. But she was also very willing to use different strategies, so she's searching the page for any information she can get through the pictures. She's very much visually inclined, so anything that's visually displayed on the page she was able to gain information from. So I was very impressed that she was using a strategy to help her comprehension, but just utilizing the words alone was not helpful for her. So her brother is also severely autistic. He is 2 years older than her, so he's 9. And he also has the same innate ability with reading. His comprehension is even less than Kaya's, but his reading ability is about comparable to hers. So it's very intriguing to see both of them and how they both are able to read so effortlessly, but struggle to understand that words have meaning. So in the reading and in the video that I did to understand this disorder, I was very, very curious as to why so little research has been done. I find it truly fascinating, and I'd love to do research on it. But there's little supported research that shows how we help these students learn to read and understand what they're reading. So there's only 5 strategies that exist that are research-based, which is upsetting. So hopefully there will be more research done in the future so we can better understand this disorder and how to properly teach it. to improve reading comprehension. I found it very interesting how in the videos she said that hyperlexia should almost be excluded to only labeling a reading disability with those that have autism, because of how much the characteristics of autism are pertinent to this disorder. So that was very interesting, and it made a lot of sense to me, where a lot of the deficits that are associated with autism are also linked to why they're unable to understand what they're reading. So the fixation and the obsessions with the words and this innate ability to memorize things follows along with a lot of the characteristics of autism, but they struggle with understanding social cues or being able to think abstractly, which is very essential to comprehending what you're reading. So it made a lot of sense how autism and hyperlexia could go hand in hand. Kaya and Kieran both are atypical for the profile of hyperlexia as well. Normally the generic profile, I guess you would say, for hyperlexia is like higher functioning on the spectrum, having above average IQ, and they're in general education most of the day, and they're average on most standardized comprehension tests. And a lot of times their inability with comprehension isn't diagnosed until, or it's noticed until much later. They're able to hide it because of their ability with decoding words and reading. But with both of these guys, it was very apparent from very early on. They couldn't understand anything that they read, but they could read very well. They're also diagnosed as severely autistic. They were both nonverbal at one point. Kieran is still labeled as nonverbal. Kaya is no longer. And they're both in a resource room all day for when they're at school. So when working with these two to develop their reading comprehension, some of the strategies that I will now implement that I gained from these videos are including primer passages. So having the relevant facts given to them before they complete any readings, so they're already primed to know what facts are important, and they have a general understanding of what is going to be taught in that reading, so what information they're looking for, and then giving them multiple exposures to a text, so reading it over and over and over again will also be really helpful for them. And then very thematic stories, so something that can be demonstrated or acted out or drawn. Kai is very artistically inclined, so drawing out the story was going to be very helpful for her to understand the story. And even though they're able to read above grade level, keeping the text that they're reading at a lower level is going to be easier for them to understand it, keeping the text very simplistic and very concrete for now until they really start to get an understanding that words have meaning and that they can demonstrate a story. And then explicitly teaching them any kind of strange structures with text, so like idioms or anything like that, that's not going to be a concrete explanation of what it's trying to demonstrate. So there's a few of the strategies that I'll make sure to include when working with reading with them. But there's also a lot of really cool apps that I'll show on the next slide. So Question Builder is a really cool app that's only $6 to buy, and it's a really great stepping stone for kids to understand some of the more abstract questions, how to answer those questions. So who, what, where, when, why is this story talking about? Who's involved? What's happening? How are things occurring? So with this app, there's 3 different levels. So you start out with a picture, and it's going to ask you direct questions about the picture, and then the student has to answer those very concrete questions. And then it goes up into higher levels where it's asking more abstract questions. For this app, it only uses pictures rather than a text, so it'd be a great starter for understanding how to answer comprehension questions. So rather than having to worry about text and then trying to tackle the text as well as the comprehension questions, this app cuts out the text, and then they can only focus on how to answer these questions and what these questions are asking them. And then once they become confident with that app, then they could move on to Reading for Details, which this app's $4, and it's going to present them with a text and then ask them the questions. The same type of questions: who, what, where, when, why. And this one is leveled from 2nd grade up past 6th grade. And instead of labeling the grade levels on the difficulty, it's just labeled red, blue, and green. So red is from 2nd to about mid-3rd grade, and then blue level is halfway through 3rd grade to 5th grade, and then the green level is 5th grade through halfway through 6th grade. So it can give a wide range of skill levels in this one app, and you can play it as a game, and it incorporates bingo in the game. So the students will read a passage, they'll have to answer the questions, and if they get enough of the questions correct, then they get a bingo marker, and they get to place it on the bingo card, and then if you get 5 in a row, then you win. And this is the really cool thing about this, is that you can play with multiple people. So students can play against each other, have a fun competition while working on reading comprehension. Light Sail is a fun one to practice reading. So it has a wide array of books that are available through the app. And then you can test the comprehension after a student reads the book through the app. And there's a lot of other accommodations that you can use, like there's a dictionary and some other things that you can use while in the device or in the app and reading the book to aid in comprehension. It also would be helpful for progress monitoring because it tracks all the students' ability and what books they've read and how they answer the comprehension questions in that app. So that's a great benefit. There's another one that's Reading A to Z, which is a little robot, and very similar to it, where it has a wide array of books that are available through the app, and the students are able to read the book while on the app and then answer comprehension questions, and everything is tracked so that you could go back and review how they did on that particular book later on. Aesop's Quest I found very interesting, something I'll definitely look into because I think my niece and nephew would really like it. And the more of a conquest and an adventure style to this app is very intriguing, and I think they would really appreciate it. So rather than having to be giving the daunting task of reading a book, answering questions, reading a book, answering questions, they now have a purpose where they're trying to finish this quest. And in order to finish the quest, they have to read the story and answer the questions correctly. And if they don't answer enough questions correctly, they have to go back and reread the text, which is a great skill to learn. And then they get a puzzle piece after each section of their quest is completed. And once they finish their puzzle, then that quest is officially done and they can move on to the next story. So I think that one's really interesting and really fun to do. And it'll help break up the monotony of reading, especially if the reading's challenging for students. And then Endless Alphabet is an app that Kai and Kieran love. It is probably their favorite app, which is interesting. It has a lot of very complex vocabulary. And in this app, it provides an outline of different words such as quarrel, hilarious, invisible. And it gives the letters for those words on the screen, and the student has to drag and drop the words into their correct outline. And for the entire time the student's touching the letter, it gives the sound that the letter makes, which is cool to build that phonemic awareness. And once the word is completed, it has a image of what the vocabulary word represents, and then provides an animation to demonstrate the definition, and then it gives an explicit verbal definition, which is cool. A really great way to build vocabulary and increase spelling. So that's just a brief overview of all of these different apps that can be used to build reading comprehension.